What drives you, Exile? Is it justice? Revenge? Honor? No. It is power. Your limits will be tested. Break them. Do what is thought impossible, and the Atlas will follow.
If you are looking for an absolutely massive slam build, well, this isn't that. This build is all about zooming. Although we are using a slam, we are hitting many times per second, and we are going extremely fast. This build is getting upwards of 135% increased movement speed with no Quicksilver Flask on. And on top of that, with a little bit of investment, 10 million DPS is achievable with cooldowns. Now, this isn't anything revolutionary. This is a simple dexterity stacking tree on the newly updated Raider. Now that we've gotten some numerical adjustments and quality of life given to the Raider, this allows us to make a giant zoomy slam ice crash dex stacking build. It has been a long time and I've really been looking forward to an ice crash build, and it looks like we finally got it. Now I want to specifically preface this video and say that this is not League Start friendly in any way. This build uses almost all exclusively uniques, and some of them are hard to come by. Now that being said, the budget version of this build is not insanely expensive. However, due to this video or anything else, the price of these items may fluctuate. I can't control the economy, so things that I might say in here being like 10 to 20 chaos may go up significantly after this video or because of other reasons, so don't blame me if it's not exactly what I said it is. The entire idea of this build is to utilize the hollow palm technique cluster jewel. What this does is it makes it so that we count as dual wielding while we are unencumbered. That means that we have no gloves on as well as no weapons. You might know of face breakers, which makes it so that we can't have any weapons on. However, this takes it one step further. A hollow palm technique gives us 60% more attack speed while we are unencumbered, and it gives us 14 to 20 added attack physical damage per 10 dexterity. This is a ridiculous amount of base damage and a ridiculous amount of attack speed. So the main goal of this build is going to be getting as much dexterity as humanly possible. And we do that in a few ways, either through gear that increases our stats, or through the skill tree, which either gives us flat dexterity or percentage increased dexterity, as well as a couple of jewels that help us boost it even further. There are multiple versions of this skill tree. One of them is a lot more intense, but there is a budget version that I think that you should start with first. If you do have tons of money, you can begin with the high tier skill tree first, but it is much more complicated, so be aware. Now, talking about what this build is actually capable of, this build absolutely destroys bosses. And even with the budget version of it, you still are going to be chilling and freezing bosses constantly and doing excellent damage. This does not have the absolute fastest clear, but because we move so insanely quickly, the clear is still perfectly fine in my opinion. I was able to do pretty much every single boss encounter in the game with this build, and it was extremely comfortable. Anything from all of the Conquerors in under 5 seconds to pretty comfortably killing Uber Elder and more. So now that you have an idea of what you're getting into, let's jump into game and take a little bit of a closer look. Hey guys, Big Ducks here, and welcome back to the channel. Now remember, if you're enjoying my content, make sure that you like this video so that you can see more content like this. Also, over 75% of you are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe so that these videos will show right up in your feed. Now without further ado, let's get back to the video. Alright boys, so there's a couple things that I want to talk about before we get into the actual guide itself. The first thing I want to talk about is there are timestamps and chapters down below this video. If you have like a specific question about a specific section or you're coming back to the video later, make sure that you check those out so you can jump to each individual section. Also, I do want to remind you that there is a Discord link down in the description. If you have specific problems and you need specific answers, the only real way to get help with any of my builds or anything else is to join my Discord. Make sure that you check that out. Now, this build in and of itself, as I said, is an Ice Crash Raider. Now, don't worry about the name. It's literally just a joke from my Twitch streams, which you should go check out, by the way. This is going to be a very, very fast character. The main thing that I want to talk about is, like, without a Quicksilver Flask, look how quickly we're moving just in town with no buffs whatsoever. And this gets even faster when we're in a map because we're going to get Frenzy Charges, which gives us a ton of movement speed. So the first thing that I want to talk about are the skills. This build actually has very few skills because we don't have a weapon or shield or offhand or gloves to be able to put anything in. So we've only got our main link and our chest piece and some supporter links. So our main ability is going to be Ice Crash. This is going to be a slam ability that has 3 parts to it. The very first hit is going to be this little circle in the middle, and then there's going to be 2 hits that get larger and larger that do less damage sequentially. So with Ice Crash, the main thing that we're looking to do is we're looking to scale how quickly we hit, and we're looking to just scale as much damage as we possibly can. Now, because we are the one with nothing build, we're using the small cluster one with nothing that gives us hollow palm technique. We're mainly looking to scale dexterity because that gives us added physical damage. We also have an insane amount of attack speed. So the idea is we're really trying to scale that base damage and increase that base damage because we've got a ton of attack speed already. So the other abilities that we're going to be using are, we're going to be using 2 auras. That's going to be Blood and Sand and Hatred. These are just the 2 auras that affect us the most. We are currently using the Supreme Ego Keystone. Now, you don't have to use this if you have mana problems. I currently am using a mana flask to cover this issue because this only leaves us with 66 mana. If you take the Supreme Ego out, your damage will go down a little bit, but you don't really have to worry too much about that. When you're able to handle it with your mana, you can take that note. However, we have 2 auras. Hatred is going to just be giving us a bunch of gained physical as extra cold and deal more cold damage. This is by far the best aura that we have, and we actually scale the effectiveness of this aura a lot. You can see we've got 80% increased effect of this aura. The other aura that we're going to be using is not actually an aura, it's a stance. The idea behind Blood and Sand and the reason why we can use it with Supreme Ego, even though it says you can only have 1 permanent aura, is because this isn't an aura. I wasn't aware of this until now, but this is simply a stance, so you can use it with any other aura, and it's not actually considered an aura. Now, you've got 2 different ones. When we're in Blood Stance here, you'll notice that it does make it rather small, but when we swap over to Sand, the AoE does get a little bit larger, but we lose some damage. So the idea is while you're clearing, you can run around in Sand Stance, you can do larger AoE, and then for bosses you can simply switch over and you'll be able to do more single target. Honestly, the difference isn't so huge. I don't really swap off of Blood almost ever, kind of just stay in Blood all the time. You can swap to Sand if you really want to. Other than that, you can use any movement ability that you like. However, I personally have been using Flame Dash because it doesn't require any additional links. With Dash, you kind of require Second Wind, and I need every single link that I can get here because every single one is important. We already move extremely fast, so we don't need to worry about that. The next ability is Frost Bomb. This actually does 2 things. If you've seen any of my recent content, you'll know that I've been advocating for Frost Bomb as a counter to the Maven's Heals. Well, on top of all of that, this also does give cold exposure, 25 of it. So it actually makes us do more damage because we do all cold damage, 100% cold damage. So the idea is this both reduces the healing that the Maven does, as well as it causes us to do more damage. The only other abilities that we really have going are a cast when damage taken, and that's with Immortal Call, increased duration, and then there's also a Vol Ancestral Warchief in here. Now the Vol Ancestral Warchief is just a separate ability. It doesn't actually have to be linked to this. You could take Frost Bomb, put it at a lower level, and put it in this cast when damage taken if you didn't want to cast it yourself. However, I prefer to cast it myself most of the time. This Vol Ancestral Warchief is just a huge DPS cooldown that we can use. We pop these down. You can either use the standard one if you don't have charges, or you can use 2 Vol Ancestral Warchiefs to get a ton of extra damage while you're going. And that is literally all of the abilities that we can use because we just don't have any more slots for more abilities. A very simple playstyle. You've got 2 auras, you've got 2 buffs, and you got a movement skill. Besides your main attack, that's pretty much it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here is gear, and gear is a very interesting topic here because there is a lot of small choices that you can make. However, the specifics to this gear is that most of this is going to be about the same. There are a few pieces of gear which I feel are mostly non-negotiable until you get into the very, very high tier, and even then it's probably not much better. Garakon's Flight, Fractal Thoughts, and probably the Taste of Hate. These 3 items, I don't think that there's any reason not to use these. They just do so much for us. Starting with the Fractal Thoughts, this gives us increased dexterity, because our dexterity is always the highest, elemental damage percentage per dexterity, and life per intelligence. This is a ton of damage. I don't feel that it's worth ever getting rid of this. You could if you wanted, but you would lose a lot of damage for no real reason. There's not a ton of helmets besides like mirror tier helmets that would be as useful as this for us. Gives us a bunch of life, gives us a bunch of elemental damage, gives us a bunch of dexterity. All stuff that we're looking for. Keep in mind we can't actually crit, so critical strike multiplier just straight up doesn't matter. The next piece that I talked about is Garricon's Flight. These, in my opinion, are completely non-negotiable. There's no boots that are better than this. This makes us immune to all ground effect types besides chaos ground effects, gives us good movement speed, good dexterity, good evasion rating. It gives us regeneration of life while we're moving, and is our main source of life on this build. We don't have a lot of pieces of gear, so 2 to maximum life per 10 dexterity. We're looking at like 1500 dexterity, so if you divide that by 10, you get 150. So these boots are giving us 300 life, if I did my math correctly. If I didn't, let me know, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. Yeah. So that's an insane amount of life. There's no other piece of gear that's going to give us that much life. Those are the only things besides the Taste of Hate. Taste of Hate is just so much damage. This, if you had to use one flask, this is going to be the one. Other than that, the rest of this gear can actually be swapped out for other things. Astramentus is a very, very good amulet. I suggest that you just keep this because anything beyond Astramentus is just going to be better off at mirror tier level, literally. Astramentus gives us intelligence and strength, which both help us. I mean, 100 plus dexterity is really hard to get in the best of circumstances on a normal rare amulet. You're looking at mirror tier to replace it. The next thing is going to be the belt. For the belt, we use Cyclopean Coil just because this gives us immunity to freeze. However, there is a belt that you can use, if I can find it here, that is going to be a implicit synthesized dexterity belt. If you got a better one of these, like an 18% implicit, and you rolled it extremely well, you could potentially make this better. However, you're going to have to get some way to be freeze immune with your flasks, meaning you need like a corrupted blood jewel, and then you'd have to make one of these flasks a freeze and chill immunity flask, because otherwise we have no way to get that. So the idea is you could make a belt like this to get you a little bit more life. However, keep in mind that it really does require a lot of life to make up for this, because we get a ton of life base, and the increased attributes is actually going to be increasing our strength, which gives us more life as well. So it's actually really hard to replace this belt. The main reason that you would do it is for a tiny bit more dexterity, maybe if you rolled a very, very good one, and you'd be able to get more resist and some more like flask type buffs and things like that. So besides that, I really think that this belt is fine. I would transition into it as soon as you can. Next thing I want to talk about are the rings. Rings, you're just looking for life, as much resistances as you possibly can get, and dexterity. This is where the vast majority of your resists are going to come from. I highly suggest that you really focus up on life and resists here over everything else. Dexterity is secondary here. Also, you can get something like frostbite on hit, which is really nice. This ring I got for a bargain. Normally this ring would be worth a lot because it's got LE damage with attacks, it's got life, it's got some resist, and it's got the curse with frostbite on hit. You can look for a ring like this, but really you're just looking for life, resist, and then dexterity. You don't need something like this, but it is a big damage boost later. Now the last piece is going to be the chest piece. Now ideally the quality thing at the top would be dexterity here. Unfortunately, I haven't found one in Harvest in a long time. This chest piece is an upgrade through a prophecy. I suggest that you buy the 6-link base of the initial chest piece and then upgrade it through the prophecy. It makes it significantly cheaper. Now you might be asking, Big Ducks, how'd you get 5 red on that? That's 5 off colors on a huge dexterity chest piece. What did you do? What I did is Harvest. There isn't really a good way to get 5 off color red on this without Varici or Harvest. You can, however, use alternate skills. So the idea being is that you can use faster attacks and hypothermia in these links. It is pretty easy to get 3 red, 3 green. So until then, you could probably take out melee fizz and maybe elemental damage with attacks and then swap those in later. These are significantly better than these two, so keep that in mind. In the meantime, it still should work out. Now, as for another option for a chest piece, if you're going for something more expensive, you could get like a dual influence chest piece that gave you like frenzy charges on hit or something, and maybe like dexterity, or you could go for like explodey and dexterity or something like that. Keep in mind that anything having to do with crit is worthless, but you could potentially do better than this if you did get like a double influence chest piece. However, the bonuses that you get from it, I don't know, man. It doesn't seem like enough to really make it worthwhile. This is pretty easy to get. It's not that expensive for a 6-link, and I think it does most of it. And that's pretty much it for the gear. We can talk about the flasks real quick. The only thing to note is that we're using a phasing flash just so it's easier to move through enemies. I personally am using an enduring eternal mana of acceleration. This is something that we're using to cover our mana due to Supreme Ego. It just makes our life a little bit easier. You can use the Wise Oak plus not use Supreme Ego initially, and that will be fine. However, the damage difference between those two made it worth it for me, so I swapped over. Taste of Hate we already talked about. Adzuri's Promise is gaining us physical and elemental. We actually convert to elemental, so we are scaling base fizz, so this flask is amazing. It also covers some of the chaos resistance that this build naturally lacks. It's really, really hard to get chaos resist on this build. And then the last thing is going to be a Seething Divine Life Flask. Panicked, Seething, and Bubbling are all good. However, one of the main recovery mechanics of this build is through this flask. If you're having issues with sustaining your life, you really need to manage this flask extremely well. That's pretty much going to be it for the gear. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the skill tree and also the cluster jewels. Now, this skill tree is an absolute mess. This is a very, very difficult skill tree. I would suggest that you look in the path of building for the multiple different skill trees I have in there. I highly suggest that you take a look at there because there's way more information and when and what you should do in the notes and such there. Check that out because this is a very complicated skill tree, and the other version that doesn't require this whole giant path, you probably see that my skill tree is orange for some reason. That's because we're using these split personality jewels. We'll talk about those in a moment, but this is very complicated, so maybe go look at the other skill tree and path of building if you're just initially starting out. First thing I always want to talk about in the skill tree is going to be the Ascendancy. We are a raider because this makes us go fast, and this makes us attack and move fast. And attacking and moving fast is really cool, and it's fun to zoom, so that's the whole point of this build. You might be asking me, Big Ducks, the Quartz Infusion and Avatar of the Veil are really good, why aren't you using them? Well, it turns out that because of Frostbomb, we actually have this elemental penetration. Ignite and Shock aren't really huge, like, deals, honestly, and the additional dodge and spell dodge, I mean, it's called Quartz Infusion for a reason. We're using a quartz flask. We get most of the effect just from using that flask. These are good, but at a certain point, I think that they're probably not worth it over going really, really fast. So the first thing we'll talk about is going to be the main thing of the Raider, and that is going to be the Frenzy Charges. So this gains us Frenzy Charges on kill as well as Frenzy Charges when we hit a rare unique enemy, gives us another additional Frenzy Charge. We also get increased evasion, movement speed, attack speed, and attack damage per Frenzy Charge. I think this build has like 7 Frenzy Charges right now, so the idea is we're getting 7 times all of those effects just constantly. Doesn't matter if we're clearing or bossing. So the other part of it, and the fun part of it, is going to be the Onslaught nodes. This just gives us Onslaught permanently. It's the reason why you see me zooming around in town and moving so fast without anything going on. The idea is we get Onslaught permanently, which gives us 20% attack, cast, and movement speed, and then we also get a bunch of Onslaught effect here. So we get a ton of Onslaught effect, and we get a bunch of chance to evade melee and projectile attacks. So this build goes really, really fast. Now, as for the skill tree that I talked about before, this is a very complicated skill tree. The whole purpose of this particular skill tree is putting as many points in a line as we can get between the start of our tree and these split personality jewels. That is the whole point of this tree. We still grab everything that we need to, however, we're trying to make this big, giant, unbroken line that doesn't have any skips. Like if we took this node, it would reduce our damage by quite a bit. We're taking all of these nodes going in this order, trying to make sure that we cut all the way through here. Don't accidentally skip in between, like taking this node or this node would be really bad, and trying to put as many points as we can in between these. You'll see that there are 50 allocated points in between each of these split personalities. That gives us a total of 67 strength and dexterity per one of these, and then that is scaled beyond with the rest of our stuff. The other thing that we're using a couple jewels here. We're using an Intuitive Leap. This allows us to grab these nodes here on the tree for free. This is just a good spot for this. You don't have to use this, but it saves you a couple of points, and these are just, there's just a bunch of really nice nodes here. Other thing we're using is a Brutal Restraint Jewel. This is a huge amount of damage, and there's a lot of really good nodes that you can get here. The main ones we're looking for are increased dexterity that you can see here. There's also this one that can give you like chance to blind enemies on hit. There's gain physical as cold. There's a bunch of really useful things like increased flash charges gained. There's stuff like avoid being stunned and other things like that. Like you can get like cold resistance and all kinds of stuff on these nodes. Whenever you divine this, you're going to be getting a different set of nodes, like you're going to be getting different buffs. It does give 4 dexterity or 2 dexterity to each small node on this tree, but you'll see that the ones that were on here, like this one is 4% increased maximum life. All of these change depending on the number of this jewel. The person that it's in service of doesn't matter. Like this one is the trader, gain 4 flash charges per empty flash slot every 5 seconds. We don't use this at all. We don't care about the keystone. We're just using this for the dexterity and the buffs. That's pretty much it for the specifics. There are going to be some cluster jewels in here. These are very useful. The one with nothing is non-negotiable. You have to use this. It's the whole reason for the build. We do just use a bunch of random jewels that give us life, resistances, and dexterity. You will need to get some resistances from your tree. You'll notice that we do take a lot of resist nodes here. There's a resist node there. There's a resist node here. These jewels all have resistances on them. We take these 3 resist nodes here. It's because resists are very, very hard to come by on this build. As for the basics of the tree itself, we're mainly just looking for life, dexterity, things that help us with dual wielding, a bunch of good keystones, and that's about it. You'll see we come out here, we grab this life and evasion rating, attack speed, dexterity, come up through here, grab some keystones, some life, and some resists. We convert a whole bunch of strength into dexterity with fluid motion. Come down here, life, dual wield nodes, life. We gain these frenzy nodes here because these are super useful to us. Having 7 frenzy charges gives us a ton of movement speed, a ton of attack speed, a ton of damage. And then we also gain like max frenzy charges here, some resist nodes. This 1 leech node is very important. This is the main way that we're going to recover mana and life. And then also beyond that, we do grab Wind Dancer. This is a dodge build after all. Life, some cluster jewels. The cluster jewels are not super important that this is the specific set that you get. Just know that Vengeful Commander is very powerful on this build. You can see we have like 80% effectiveness of Hatred right now. And then we come up through here, these dexterity nodes, we grab these couple of nodes because they're good, the dodge nodes, more cluster jewels, life, and maximum frenzy charges. That is pretty much it for the actual build itself. In the alternate version, you take some more nodes in this area, you move this Brutal Restraint keystone up to this slot right here, and you put in some nodes here, so make sure that you check that out. I know that was a lot to take in, just make sure that you go check out the Path of Building. I suggest that you take a look at that. It's much more in depth and much easier to look through. The last thing I want to talk about is leveling. This is actually one of the best leveling builds in the game. If you have never played with specifically one with nothing while leveling, I heavily suggest that you give this a try. It is easily one of the fastest and most damage leveling builds, and all it requires is this 1 with nothing jewel and an Astramentus to start leveling. You have those 2 things, you will absolutely be slamming the entire game, like no problem whatsoever. I use Smite. That was the ability that I used because it just absolutely destroyed everything. You'll get through most of the game in just a couple of hours. I think I got like my fastest time ever on all the way through the game, which was like 3.5, 4 hours or something like that. With this build and this leveling gear. This is not a league start build. When you're actually leveling, I highly suggest you don't do this with no gear and no currency. You're gonna need a couple pieces of gear. So just make sure that you do this with the gear already purchased, because it's not really going to be fun if you try to level up as this ability without the like absolutely required jewels. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so as always, I kind of want to give you just an idea of the playstyle of this build. We're going to be running a map. We are on Awakener 8 right now, as high as it can get besides the node here, which I really don't think is that great. We're going to be running a tier 16 iceberg map. This is just a random one I hit with an alchemy, and we're going to be running a bunch of scarabs. So let's get in here. We're going to run all these scarabs. We'll throw Einhar on it just because, and what's a good infused mod that we can put on here? Why don't we put like infused bloodlines or something on here? That seems perfectly fine. So the idea behind this build is that while it is mainly a bossing build, we move fast enough that I actually think that the clear on this build is quite good. It's not the best clear in the game, but you can do this thing where if you click back and forth between left click and right click, you can kind of get the build to do this like stutter step kind of thing here, which makes the clear significantly better. You don't need to do that because it is a lot of clicking, but if you just kind of like hold left click and right click as you move around, you will notice that you attack a couple of times each. If you do like the little stutter step clicking thing, you don't have to do that. But it's a very simple playstyle. We're just running around, you hit it with the ice crash, it does a big boom, it kills all the enemies quite quickly. But as I said, this build is mainly focused around bossing. Now, you'll notice that we get like these stacks of Vol Ancestral Warchief. I don't actually think that they're super useful until you get to the boss itself. I really don't ever feel a need for them because we, for the most part, just like 1 or 2 shot any rare that we come across here. You'll see like that rare got completely 1 shot, that rare got completely 1 shot. I mean, the build does a ridiculous amount of damage, so there's not much of a need for us to worry about, you know, popping cooldowns while we're just killing stuff. So we're going to jump to the boss now, and I'm just going to show you what this build is really made for, and that is going to be finding divine orbs, apparently. That's going to be bossing, so I'll see you there in just a moment. All right, so now that we're coming up on the boss here, I want you to know it's important that you do try to maintain your frenzy charges, because when you lose your frenzy charges, you lose a lot of damage. So the idea is we're going to run up in here, We're going to see if we can find where this boss is actually spawned, and we're going to pop all of our cooldowns, pop everything here, and we're just gonna go. Now, you'll notice that these bosses, when we can find them, when we can hit them, because the Maven is making them disappear, just kind of melt mostly instantly. Of course, the Maven likes to make things difficult, unfortunately, but that's just kind of her job, right? Now, specifically talking about the Maven, one thing that you can do, as I've said many times before, is that you can just simply use Frostbomb to stop her regeneration. However, with all of the Harbingers and everything else there, I could barely see what was going on. But you can see tons of damage there. I mean, I didn't even do everything completely properly. I'm not even sure if I hit my Vol Ancestral War Chiefs, to be perfectly honest with you. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Either way, the bosses died in just a few seconds. Now, as you saw in the previews, this works with pretty much any content in the game. I've done all of it, but it's a very, very comfortable build. Very, very good for bosses because it slows them so heavily since we're hitting for all cold damage. And I really do hope that you give this build a try, especially if you're looking for like a nice, fast, really quick hitting melee build, because this is about the best that I've been able to find when it comes to that. So I do want to take a quick moment just to jump into the path of building to show you a couple things to look for inside of the path of building. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so we're in the path of building now. I just want to go over a couple of things really quickly because there is some stuff in here that is worth mentioning in case you're having some issues. I want to note that there are two different skill trees for this build. This one that you see here, the main one that's going to load up, is the split personality in-game tree. This is very complicated. I need you to know that there is a lot going on here. It has to do with these split personality jewels that you can see here. I highly suggest if you don't know what you're doing with this tree, you come down here and you choose the alternate level 100 tree. This tree here is much more straightforward. It has less cluster jewels, it has less shenanigans going on, and this is more so like a standard normal tree. You'll see that the DPS only goes down to 7 million when it comes here as compared to the 10.7 million that's here, so you're honestly not losing that much damage, and this tree is significantly more straightforward, significantly cheaper because you don't need the split personalities and you don't need the cluster jewels. You only really use the one cluster jewel down here just to get the Vengeful Commander and all this other good stuff here, as well as the one with nothing. So I highly suggest that you try this one out first and then transition into the other one. It's going to take like 20 or 30 regret orbs to be able to transition properly, just because you have to move so many points around. If you know what you're doing, then feel free to go ahead with the other one. Other than that, there are leveling trees. These leveling trees are specifically going to be for the basic version of the build. You'll notice that in each of the leveling trees, it's going to tell you which ascendancy points to take first. So as you jump through these trees, you will see the different ascendancy points. It'll tell you which points to take in what order so that you have an easier time leveling up all the way through up to the end game. Beyond that, there are skills in here. You'll notice that there are leveling skills. They're sectioned by what levels you should use them. There are also the end game links. Keep in mind that on the Ice Crash one here, you're going to notice it's got like a whole bunch of links in here. As you saw up at the top, it says support gems are in order of importance. As I mentioned multiple times now, the chess piece is very hard to get 5 off colors on. So what you can do is if you don't have 5 red on the chess piece yet, you can use these 2 support jewels instead. So the idea is that you should use them in this order of priority, meaning that if you can, your link should be Ice Crash, Multi-Strike, Fortify, Elemental Damage with Attacks, Cold Pin, and Melee Fizz. You can't get that many reds, then you just slot these in instead of Melee Fizz or Elemental Damage with Attacks. There's also all the rest of the utility abilities here. Everything else is in here. In the item section, you'll notice that there is a budget setup. My gear, this is the gear that my character currently has at this point in time. And then there is the expensive gear. In the budget setup, the main difference is going to be the socket colors on the wild wrap. The rings are a little bit different, and we are using a couple different jewels. In the my gear setup, this is just my gear that my character has. This is what you saw in the video. This is what you saw in all of the previews and all that kind of stuff. It's all this gear right here. The expensive gear doesn't change much. This is just a double influence crafted chess piece that gives you an additional curse. Also, these rings are a frostbite on hit ring and an elemental weakness on hit ring. These are insanely expensive. These items aren't meant to be like realistically obtainable for the average person, so just keep that in mind. Beyond that, the configuration tab should be correct. I think everything is correct in here. This DPS is on Cirrus, so the idea being is that you shouldn't have to worry about like, you know, I could always be like, well, no, my DPS is like 10 million, or if I swap over to my other tree, yeah, dude, my DPS is totally like 17 million because I'm, you know, cheating and not actually putting it on Cirrus. My path of building should always be on Cirrus. So that's pretty much it. This should all be correct. Last thing to note is that there are a ton of notes in here. If you have questions and it hasn't been answered by anything else, try looking through these notes. There's a bunch of stuff here, and that's going to be pretty much it for the path of building. Make sure that you look at this if you have any questions about the build. And that is going to be the end of the video. Now remember, once again, if you have any specific questions, make sure that you join my Discord. It's linked down in the description. It is the best way to get specific help with any of my builds or anything else relating to PoE or Big Ducks or anything else that you want to know about. So I'd be really happy if you come and be part of the community. We're over 7,000 members strong now. I sometimes do streams on the weekends talking about all kinds of PoE stuff, all kinds of other cool stuff. Just when I'm trying to make builds and things like that, you might catch something cool over on Discord. Now, not to overload you too much with self-promotion and social media, but I do have a Twitter that I've been a little bit more active on, at @big_ducks. You can find links to that down in the description as well. If you want to see my random takes on all the new stuff that's been going on out there, like maybe Path of Exile does something cool, or there's these new Diablo stuff that's coming out, like Diablo 2 Remastered, and Diablo 4 got like a new class or something like that, make sure that you follow me over there so that you can see some of the stuff that I talk about. So I hope that you give this build a try. It is easily one of my favorites of this entire league. Big boss damage, really zoom fast, move through maps, all kinds of good clear, all kinds of good everything. And I really do hope that you give it a try. So remember guys, if you enjoy this content, make sure that you like this video. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I'll see you guys in the next video.